folks. Welcome inside the Parisi Palace, high above 3773 East Broadway. This is the Jake Feinberg Show. Coming to you on Power Talk. Please go to our website, powertalk.live. Download our free app and stream all of our live local programming, including Solomon on Blast, the Jim Parisi Show, and yours truly, the Jake Feinberg Show. Can't thank you enough for making us part of your day today. Just heard from Steve Kahn, very gifted guitar player, who really actually started his career in the Southern California area, playing with a lot of the Jazz Crusaders, and that's not even on the record in most of his biography. But really, it's a treat now to bring in a guy who George Marsh hit me to him for a while back. I've been trying to dig deeper and deeper into the history of the musical lexicon of our society, how these things actually germinated, how they were the seeds that were planted that led to things. And as a 39-year-old broadcaster and journalist, most of my generation as a Gen Xer, and certainly the millennials and whatnot, believe that somehow there was this cataclysmic explosion that started in 1967, and everything just germinated out of that in the Summer of Love. And then so all of a sudden Sly Stone was the originator of funk music, and the Grateful Dead just sort of happened to appear, and Janis and Quicksilver and Jefferson Airplane, and that's just San Francisco. That doesn't speak to the idea of the second cities, the multi-tiered entertainment that was taking place on all levels. Richard Pryor opening for Miles Davis. You had so many of the old school cats, artists, actors that would come in, do skits, musicians would play behind them. And ultimately, it just had this organic nature that lent itself to incredible spontaneity, incredible creativity. And one of these sort of enclaves or communities, if you will, was in fact the what we now know as the San Francisco Mime Troupe. And what a high honor! I get a chance to talk to a cat today who was directly involved with this troupe. Bruce Barthol, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Thanks, Jake.
How are you, brother?
I'm doing all right. It's quite pleasant out here where I am outside of Sebastopol, California.
It's a beautiful place to be. Would you, Bruce, would you consider yourself, or could you talk about in the beatniks? Were you a beatnik, or did they come before you? And if so, which beatniks did you get a chance to hang with?
Well, let's see. I was an apprentice beatnik, which became a hippie.
Exactly.
So I was a little young to be a beatnik. So I did travel by bus with a friend of mine up to San Francisco from L.A., where I was living, and when I was 15, and we went to North Beach and went to City Lights and inhaled. It was. Yeah, I wanted to be a beatnik.
Who were? Because when I talked to Marty Ballin, for instance, growing up, he'd go downstairs into his parents' basement, and the King and Queen of Reno would be there, and or Lord Buckley would be riffing, and behind him would be a black jazz band.
Yeah.
And I wanted you to talk about some of these seminal memories you had of this mixing of the beats with bebop jazzers, because they promoted the music in their own way, and I have a feeling that was one of the reasons you were motivated to want to be a beatnik.
Well, let me see. I was, I liked jazz when I was growing up, or I thought I did, but, and so, yes, I was influenced by that. The bebop scene itself was pretty harsh.
What do you mean by that?
Well, the sessions are notorious for having the new guy get up. He's trying to play with the band, and they switch the key to C sharp.
Yeah, I dig.
Not real friendly. So.
Well, they wanted to see if you could play, but the idea was, did you grow up in the Northern California area?
Well, I was born in Berkeley, and then we moved to Pennsylvania when I was 5.
Wow.
Then to L.A. when I was 8, and then I went back up to Berkeley to go to the university when I was 16. So
Okay, so
I got back as fast as I could.
so you were going to San Francisco State, is that right?
No, Berkeley.
Cal Berkeley.
University of Cal.
Okay, so you got to Cal Berkeley, and that. So can you talk about, aside from whether you liked it or not, could you talk specifically about if it's true that the Beats helped expose white audiences to bebop language of music?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. But those, the lines between the kinds of music I don't find very satisfying, because I was basically a folkie, right?
Sure.
I mean, I played the guitar, went to folk festivals. I couldn't get into jazz clubs, when you're 15. So I was deep, into all kinds of folk music, which, as most of the San Francisco bands were, actually, I would say. The Dead used to be a jug band, and like that.
I guess if you could talk specifically about whether it was Ferlinghetti or whether it was Ginsberg, could you talk about an opportunity where you crossed paths with some of the Beats and how it affected your point of view?
Personal contact? Let me think.
Or just see them in a context where they were given a talk and how it inspired you.
Well, let's see. Did I ever hear a beatnik talk? Yes. I used to listen to Kenneth Rexroth on record.
Wow.
The beat poet and anarchist guy, and Ginsberg was influential. I was never a Kerouac fan for some reason, but, I read him too. I know why I didn't like Kerouac. He had no sense of history.
Really?
He was out discovering. Yeah, I don't think. He was out discovering America when there was, a lot going on. That was the McCarthy era, right?
Yep.
And he just no consciousness. I thought. That's my humble opinion. I hope you don't get lots of calls having me.
No. But you have to help me too, because I got to be honest with you, Bruce. At 39, I've done 1,000 primary source interviews, and that's how I've gotten educated. So I don't necessarily see that. As a poet, can you talk about his lack of consciousness? Could you give an example of what you mean by that?
Well, I haven't read him for years, but I remember when I was reading, I guess it was On the Road. It was like there was no politics in it, really. There was kind of what became it was a social critique in a way, but it wasn't very satisfying to me. He was an egomaniac, I think, and then he turned out to be a Catholic drunk. You know about that?
No, I do not.
He became a big reactionary. He lived with his mother at the end of his life, and he was constantly drunk, and he was a real asshole and a reactionary. Go figure. So, anyway, I'm not that fond of Kerouac.
But so talk. Let's get a little bit more into the warm and fuzzy. Who did you get off on, and who did you? Because those guys were also very acceptable. Accessible. Did you get? Could you talk? Even Lenny Bruce. Can you talk about some sort of inspiring moment that put you on your artistic journey?
Well, let's see. Yeah, I did. A friend of mine had a Lenny Bruce album, and so with some friends, I was in the 8th or 9th grade in junior high school, and I had a friend who worked in the office, and so we made a tape of Lenny Bruce, and we put him on the school PA, except the guy it only played in the offices. not in the classroom.
Oh, wow.
But so there was an early. I guess I was, Lenny Bruce was influential. He was funny then too, as before he got too screwed up by the government. And he stopped.
Is there a way to talk to younger generations, myself included, about similarities and or differences between sort of the sort of parallel universes that we're going through now versus the end of the McCarthy era? Are there overlaps that you can sort of see in the arc of history, or is this a completely different kind of thing?
Well, let me see. I mean, it's pretty weird.
Which one?
I would say,
right now or then?
Well, now is weirder, I think.
Why?
Because we have this. Let's see. How can I say? 50 years ago, racism was more open. Or let me just, since before January anyway. The racism was more overt, I mean, just horrendous stuff that people would say, black people were a different species,
Sure.
Just totally bizarre, ignorant stuff, right? And, that kind of has gone away, although it's coming back now a little bit with Trump. So that's an improvement, but the institutional racism is still there.
Can you talk about the overt? I've spent several shows talking to Richard Davis, the great bass player, and he was talking about overt versus covert racism. Was the overt racism a rallying cry for folkies or beatniks in training to rally? I mean, as opposed to the deception, which is so easily thinly veiled if you are not really seeking or that in touch with your, deep feeling cat. Can you talk about the overt racism and how if it was in fact an emboldening rallying cry for people because it was more in your face?
Well, it had been for 100 years too. This
Right.
was a continuation. I mean, when I was a kid and I looked at the South, it was like no hope. That place can never change, and it did. To a great extent. So, but it looked so grim back then. On the other hand, this racist stuff produced a huge backlash. Folkies generally were not racist; they were anti-racist. For one thing, you're playing black music a lot, so that's a little weird, to be a racist. Well, then you get. Who's that idiot? Right-wing rock guy, Ted Nugent. There you go.
Yeah.
Go figure. It's insane. So but I guess one thing that was true then, or at least a lot of people felt it, including me, was that even though the times were really grim, I mean, people talk about the Summer of Love in '67. Well, that Summer of Love, the death toll from Vietnam came daily. It was a regular news report. We lost 49 guys, but we killed 4,000. That was the news reports. They kept going on and on. And if you were my age, you had to do something. You had to either go or not go. You had to either resist or go along with it. And that was a very motivational thing that a lot of people went through. I mean, you couldn't just ignore it, right? You were going to do something. They were either going to put you in the Army or you were not going to go.
Right. There was no draft.
So
there was no draft. That's interesting. Yeah, that's right. I'm sorry. It wasn't a volunteer army. That's what I meant to say. Thank you.
Yeah. No, the volunteer army was very smart move by the powers that be, because we can go to war and it doesn't affect anybody, really. Something like 2% of the country are involved.
That's right. I think it's 1%. Yeah, it's nothing.
Even worse. And so they can, I think a lot of those are economic volunteers, And, for a lot of people, the Army's not a bad deal unless you get maimed, killed, or wounded, But they can maintain these wars all over the globe without a lot of internal. I mean, where is the peace movement now? We got how many wars going on? At least 3,
Well, I would argue. I mean,
now.
how much of it? Let's break it down, because you know what, man. What's missing from the protest movement is the protest music. There's no musical component.
Well, actually, I would disagree.
Go ahead.
Actually,
Go ahead.
What's really different is the way music is heard these days.
That's exactly exactly right.
I constantly read, during still going on, but the Iraq War, when it was, newish, people were saying, "Where are the songs? Where are the songs?" And there were a tremendous amount written. Neil Young's webpage had something like 350 new anti-Iraq war songs. They were all. I wrote one. "Cakewalk to Baghdad." I wrote. But they aren't. Even though, for instance, Country Joe and the Fish was banned from AM radio because of the "Fixin' to Die" rag.
Sure.
People heard it. They heard it on FM. It was banned, so people paid attention. I think these songs just were not heard.
Well, I mean, is it also? But isn't it also the? Okay, so maybe it was banned on radio, but then because of the regionalism of radio, I mean, I interviewed Dan Healy, and he was working at commercial recorders, and they were San Francisco. You'd make jingles for San Francisco. LA would make jingles for LA. And the point is that maybe that Country Joe was banned from commercial radio, but you can bet at the Berkeley Community Theater or one of these Arabians, there were plenty of people coming out to see the music. And that's part of the issue now, is that a lot of peeps don't go. Music and in our culture does not have the same meaning, so you don't have cats coming out to see. You knew that Country Joe would just by the fact that they were being held down in mainstream, they'd get a lot of people to come out to support them publicly. So now the issue. So what you're talking about is exactly spot on. It's the dissemination of the music. Neil Young can have all the protest music he wants. To me, it just doesn't translate digitally. I mean, you can stream it, but it's not like being at a Black Panther event with Herbie Hancock's band. I mean, it just doesn't. You just don't. It's not visceral. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, or the countless, bail funds we raised over the years for various causes.
Can you talk? Could you talk about these causes, or one specific one that you did?
Oh, let's see. Well, there's one we played that I have never sent for my FBI file, fearing I wouldn't have one. But I don't think that's a real fear, actually, because let's see, when we played, Country Joe and the Fish played a benefit for the Bach Mai Hospital in Hanoi, North Vietnam, during the war. There's one. That got me on a list, didn't it?
So okay, but I mean, what about for the local cats who were, pushing a message and were jailed, or something more localized?
Let's see. They kind of blend together in my mind. What did we do benefits for? There were a bunch for people busted at anti-war demonstrations. We raised some money for the Black Panthers. And I guess my mind's a little foggy to give you.
It's okay. No, I mean, I guess, when you say,
even noticed.
when you say you raised them, what? Could you talk? Was this through the Mime Troupe? How did you? What was the?
started with Country Joe and the Fish. You know, we did a lot of benefits. You know, they were required.
Right.
A lot of people were getting.
So you were. I mean,
yeah,
I'm sorry. You were actually. You got to excuse me. You were part of the band.
Yeah. I was the bass player from '66 to '68, the first 3 LPs.
Unbelievable. So you were right in it, man. So, but, I mean, okay, I don't want to jump too far ahead because it's the Mime Troupe. That was before Country Joe.
No, Mime Troupe was after.
Really?
I was in the Mime Troupe from '76 to 2000 and something. And I occasionally do things with them now, but I was in for 34 years.
Let me ask you though, how long was the Mime Troupe in existence before? When did it actually start?
Well, it started in '59, so it was a beatnik organization when it began, and then went through its various development. It was founded by a guy named R.G. Davis, who was a radical and wanted to. He put the Mime Troupe into the parks, where we still are. Some people probably don't know. It's a summer season that we open in Dolores Park in San Francisco, and it plays around the Bay Area and outside of the Bay Area too for free shows in the parks. And believe it or not, we've educated our audience so that an opening day in Dolores Park, we might make 10 grand at the end of the show by going out with hats. Right? So it's kind of a thing. It's kind of like, you know, KPFA. It shouldn't be able to exist, right? But it still does.
Well, and it's still breathing. Which could you? So this is really fascinating. Talking to Bruce Barthol here on the Jake Feinberg Show. He's dropping a serious amount of knowledge, even though I'm really stretching out stuff that he hasn't thought about in a while. Can you talk about what essentially their point of view was? What attracted you to them before you joined in '76? I'm talking about really that early '60s period. What for my generation and others? What alternative point of view were they giving that was in these park seminars?
Well, it began, in '59, so that's pretty early in terms of, things. But it was really beginning of counterculture, I would say, and let's see. It was sort of began, what's the French phrase? It was skewering the bourgeoisie.
Wow.
That was sort of the goal of the original Mime Troupe, and it was pretty important. Before I had joined, they had been harassed and busted and won a couple of Obie awards in New York, and for a San Francisco organization, that was, something. And let me see, I'll tell you the times. The first time the Mime Troupe, which had been playing for a number of years, was reviewed by a San Francisco newspaper. It was a reprint of a review in the London Times. If you can dig that, we were not liked by the local authorities, right? But we were, Mime Troupe's always done very good work,
I just want to be clear. This was the first review was before you ever joined it.
Yeah. This is old history of the troupe.
And
the troupe had been around.
The
troupe had been around for 18 years before I joined it.
What? But it was a reprint, and what was that? Okay. So here's my question. The bottom line is this: we weren't so out of whack. You have the situation now where the banksters really run this country. You could say that essentially the mob in many of the urban centers, the mobsters ran a lot of the urban centers back in the '60s and '50s and even into the '70s. But you didn't have this income disparity that you have today. So the the skewering of the bourgeois. Who were the bourgeois, and really was it this 1% that we're dealing with today that really is essentially holding on to all of its assets, refuses to give any of its liquidity back into society? Who was the bourgeois class that was being scourged?
Well, that would have been actually probably 50% of the population, not the 1%. It was very repressive era. You have to remember the 50s. 50s were very black and white. Women really couldn't wear pants. You know what I'm saying?
Interesting. This is really this is important. Yeah, they couldn't. It was similar to the. Yeah.
I don't remember my brother's girlfriend. This would have been in the late 50s. She asked him to ask my mom whether it would be okay for her to wear pants to go to Disneyland.
Wow.
Right. I mean, it was pretty. It was a very repressive era. I mean, racially, with gender stuff. It was, when I was walking home from junior high school and I played the clarinet for a while, I would be a little bit worried about getting jumped on the way home because I was carrying a musical instrument. Right? I don't know.
And that would signify you were not a straight arrow?
Yeah. Or I was a fag or something.
Right.
I have no idea what they.
Well, okay. So this is so interesting, Bruce, because it was repressive, right? But I interviewed Merle Haggard, rest in peace. That cat went to the hole 12 times. He was still making hit records. So was it, even though it might have been repressive from the judicial system, was it as punitive as it is today? Because it's a full-on for-profit prison system now where you're putting peeps away. I mean, the point is that Merle Haggard went to the hole in San Quentin. He was arrested 12 times. Obviously, Reagan expunged him, but it's repressive. But you're looking at people now who, for a couple of joints, they're done for life. You're done for life.
Yeah, well, that's, I think it was worse then, actually.
Really?
Because,
Really?
Yeah, it was.
Wow.
Smoking pot when I started was a felony. You could go, even in California, you could go away for years for a joint.
One joint.
Yeah. Then that, it changed. They took it down from being a felony to a misdemeanor. You could still go to jail, but, but that was part of Nixon. Nixon wanted to attack hippies and black people, so he really started the war on drugs to do that. It was pretty successful.
When you
look at the prison.
Yeah. So going back to the demagoguery, obviously there was that sort of, at least in our history books, there's that moment where McCarthy's testifying in front of a panel and someone says, "Do you not have any decency?"
Yeah, you have no shame. Have you no shame?
Have you no shame? And it's like that in our history books seems to claim that it broke the camel's back. And like you brought up a very, very, very interesting point, because in the 90s, like I just wrote this out yesterday, in high school, going through college, through the late 90s, I was naive enough to think that we were living through a post-racial society. And now what we're seeing in 2017 is the cultural biases are in some ways even more deeply rooted than maybe they were back in the 50s. I mean, it's weirder and potentially much more nefarious now.
Well, I don't think that's true. I think it was worse in the 50s. I mean, you had segregation was the law of the land still, basically. Schools had not been desegregated mostly. I'm talking about like 59, right?
Sure.
And there were lynchings still. I remember reading about a lynching. My dad is a professor, and we lived in Madrid for 6 months in 1959. And I remember we were somewhere in Spain. We got a copy of the Herald Tribune or the Stars and Stripes, right? The army paper, which you could get. And I get the paper and I look at it, and there was a lynching in fucking Mississippi or some place like that. And I said to my dad, "Why don't we A-bomb the South?" Dad.
Hmm.
My father said, well, a lot of Negroes live there.
And you know what? I mean, you can say, Charlie Persip, the great drummer, still refers to himself as a Negro. But I know what you're getting at.
Yeah.
I just say to myself that segregation. It was still a segregated time, and
And the racism was more overt. I mean, it's true we just had these assholes in, Charlottesville, but I thought that was really great that they marched with their fucking swastikas and Klan robes. You can see who they are, and that really doesn't go down real well. Most people don't like that.
That's a good point. I would also argue, though, that that you look. I mean, I've done a bunch of interviews, mostly with my show. Basically, started with Afro jazzers, and I've interviewed some cats, and they'll talk about today. What's well? Let me just read you the quote if I can bring it up here. It's just it's because I think the truth is somewhere in between, but. He says, let's see, this is from Mtume, who was a Congero, actually was Jimmy Heath's son, and let me bring this up here. Yeah, so here we go. As a black man, this is him talking about 2 months ago. He said, as a black man in America, there's nothing new about what happened to Philandro Castillo. That was the guy who was shot by the cop when he was trying to show him his firearm. The only thing that's new about white cops getting off when they kill somebody black is that even having a film of it doesn't make a difference. Rodney King, you saw the footage, and those guys got off. Now we see white cops that can murder you in cold blood on film, and white people, jurors, won't convict a white cop for killing a black person. We saw Eric Garner in New York. That's on tape. What's also on tape is that a cop unit that snatches a guy for selling one-off cigarettes. The head of that unit is a black woman sergeant. Footage and film no longer means anything. That's where America is. They will not convict a white cop. To get away from that, you need to have independent. Okay, so he goes on to what could be solutions. And then he talks about, obviously, what was so great is that Charles Neville was talking about the fact to me the other day in the 60s, cocaine was the drug of choice among musicians. And I thought that was mainly in the 70s. He's like, yeah, that's when it started affecting white America. That's when you started to hear about it. Okay, so basically what he was saying with the opioid crisis now, well, it's affecting all these white cats, so they have to fund it. They have to get these programs to
exactly.
So I mean the lynchings, okay, that you'd wind up seeing these horrific pictures in Mississippi. The Klan has been around forever, and so now it's like even with film footage, you can't. There's no justice for all. There's no equal justice under the law still.
I'd say that's basically true. I would point out a white cop just did get sentenced, tried, and found convicted for shooting a black guy.
And which one was this?
That's one. I forget which one. There's so many, so many black people are murdered by the cops. It's hard to keep all the names straight. But he was sent. I just read it the other day.
I did. I'll look it up.
But I would say that the fact that they're tried is a step forward, even if they're not convicted. This is a really long process. Been going on, for hundreds of years, the race thing in this country. And I actually think it's improved over when I was a kid.
I would just say also
it works.
The thing is that Barry Goldwater didn't become president, but Donald Trump is president. So he's giving a bugle. That's the difference. Is he's giving a bugle horn to these people, to these Klan members, or whatever they are, and that to me is McCarthy didn't win, Goldwater didn't win, and so you're looking at on top of the fact that Trump is just honestly completely mentally ill. Just I mean that just throws a whole other thing into it. But can you talk, Bruce? can you talk about the first time that you crossed paths with Bill Graham and the Mime Troupe? Because I'm trying to stretch back the lineage of, like I said in my intro, Sly Stone was not the originator of funk. It was Johnny Talbot. There would have been no Grateful Dead without the Merry Pranksters, and in some cases, probably, like the Mime Troupe, people like that, the Beats. So I'm trying to get at this idea of Bill Graham in the Mime Troupe or the Mime Troupe, his involvement, and ultimately how he built his apparatus to what it became, so that you were playing his venues at the Fillmore and whatnot.
Yeah. Well, Graham was in the Mime Troupe before I was, right? He was earlier than me, but he was the financial guy. And the Mime Troupe got busted in Canada. And there was a benefit put on. And that was the first gig he put on. It was, I think, where was it? Some hall in San Francisco. I don't remember the name of. And it was a huge success. There was this, who knew there was this huge latent population of future hippies, basically, right? And it was a big success, and I think the cash registers clicked around in Graham's mind, and then he became a promoter, And I must say the early days at the Fillmore were really great, because the bills were so mixed. It was so eclectic, and you could do it in those days. Like, I played one gig, and I think it was Bola Sete Trio, right? Brazilian acoustic bossa nova.
I did.
Right?
Yep.
Country Joe and the Fish, and then the Sam and Dave Review.
Unbelievable.
That's eclectic, right? And when Bola Sete played, the whole audience sat on the floor and listened. When Country Joe and the Fish played, everybody hippie danced. And then when Sam and Dave played, everybody soul danced, And I know when I fled the country because of the draft at the end of '68 and went to London, there was a concert with the Who and Chuck Berry, and there was fighting in the audience because Who fans and Chuck Berry fans didn't get along. That was kind of a drag.
Why did that? So you're talking about the original Fillmore on Geary Street, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, because it was like Preservation Hall Jazz Band, Tiny Tim, and Little Anthony and the Imperials, stuff like that. I mean, it was just everywhere, and then obviously, So, but was Graham?
And actually, Graham, it was also the Family Dog, Chet Helm, the Avalon Ballroom. And in the early days, you could buy a ticket at the Avalon and use it at the Fillmore that night.
I love it.
Same with Fillmore. You could buy a ticket at the Fillmore and use it at the Avalon. Because there were like 3 bands, there'd be a total of 6 sets, right? So you could watch everybody and run over to the Avalon and catch that thing too. That went away, and then Graham actually kind of drove the Family Dog out of business, I think. And so then he became the rock czar of San Francisco.
Could you talk about Graham before he became the rock czar? Obviously, he figured out how to monetize that scene. But was he actually like the Mime Troupe, in essence? I mean, could you paint the picture of what they clearly weren't, playing, psychedelic folk music like you were with Country Joe, or they weren't playing music. What were they doing?
They were doing, they were doing a bunch of different things. One is they did a lot of commedia dell'arte, which is an old Italian street theater characters. It's very effective out of doors. Playing out of doors is a different world than playing on stage, Well,
I'd like
to deal with sirens, drunks, and psychotics, keep the show going.
So, I mean, what were these street scenes? I mean, these were like people coming up and at ice cream parlors and singing to beautiful women. I mean, what did these Italian scenes look like?
Oh, okay. Well, there are these stock characters in Commedia dell'arte. There's the miser, there's the drunk, there's the professor, there's the servant girl who actually runs everything. There are the two lovers, and these are all hysterically funny characters, right? And so, some of them were classic. I think the Mime Troupe did a Lope de Vega Commedia. They would be actually skewering greed and propriety. That's what Commedia does.
Could you give a couple of prose or lines that because the verbiage was different back then too. How would they do that? Was it covert or was it overt?
Well, given that usually, these commedias were set somewhere in Italy, hundreds of years ago, you could get away with a lot because, if the the Capitano, he was a bad guy. He's the militarist. If the Capitano seemed to be Lyndon Johnson, that was fine. You know what I mean? And I really can't recite you the scripts, but they were funny and a little body, nothing like today, a little body and daring.
I guess what I'm trying to say is, how did it resonate with contemporary American cats at that time, like yourself? How was it relevant to what was going on at that time?
Well, it's one thing that political theater can do is, and it was a political theater and still is, but is you can put the society up on stage and tear it apart, comment on it, have it do things. And it resonated because of it was really ahead of and right on time with the era and the feelings of people who didn't want to put up with this restrictive, pointless, morality laws. And, it was illegal to be homosexual, right? So
you would go to jail for being a homo? You'd go to jail?
Yeah. They were raiding gay bars, right?
But they were raiding gay bars, and what was the sentencing? I mean, months or years? I mean, this is...
Actually, I don't know. But they certainly hauled him off to jail.
Wow.
For some reason. And they, so it does, the famous Stonewall riots in New York? That wasn't until 1969, I think. Right? Something like that. And because the cops are going there to raid the gay bar and haul them off to jail. It was illegal. So, I keep saying it was pretty repressive. That's why long hair, man, you get so much crap for long hair. I got beaten twice in 1 year for having long hair, once for being white in the Fillmore district. But the other was the horrible redneck kids up in Napa, they really wanted to kill me. It was something.
Were you hanging around with David Nelson and Garcia and Peter Albin, those cats?
Well, I knew Peter kind of well, and the others I didn't know. I was 18 when I started with Country Joe and the Fish, and a bit shy, so I didn't just walk into scenes and claim my space.
No, but I'm saying Melton was doing like you talk about the Dead were a jug band. Melton was doing jug band music with Lester Chambers and Taj in L.A. What were you doing in the early 60s?
Well, that's a little bit of an exaggeration. Having Barry and I went to high school together, so.
Well, Barry was down at, he was hanging with, he was down at the Ash Grove. You're saying that he wasn't doing that stuff with Taj and Lester?
No, he was. Well, Maxie, you know what? I left L.A. before Barry. So I got out of school early. So I don't know really. I'm not calling him a liar, but he was not hanging at the Ash Grove much when I knew him. We hung other places. We were in the Grand High, the Grand High Folk Club. you know.
Why, so you took off, and how did you get your folk chops and your how did you get your what were you doing up in the Berkeley area in that early '60s period before you joined Country Joe?
Well, let me see. I went up to Berkeley in '64 to go to Cal, and you may remember that was the fall semester of the free speech movement.
I was born in '78, so it's all before my time. Go ahead.
Yeah, okay. Well, the free speech movement was like the first real student, the first student strike that I'm aware of since like the 30s or something. And it was, it was in a different era. We were very polite, we student rebels. There was never a riot. They kept accusing us of rioting, but we were nonviolent and we were respectful, except we were shutting things down. But, we didn't, there was no trashing of stuff. We got attacked by like the frat rats. And a couple of times at demonstrations there, but it was that was quite an event, and it was I would say it was one thing it did was it sure brought a lot of radicals to Berkeley. That's why I went back to Berkeley in part because it was where things were going on. I joined Congress of Racial Equality Corps when I was 14, I think, just because, they were murdering people in the South, and I never did. My parents weren't racist, so I just never understood it, I just thought it was bizarre and horrible. And so I, wanted to, contribute to the solution. So that's one reason I went to Berkeley. My hometown. I always, Berkeley was the one place when I was a kid where you could see foreign cars and guys with beards.
So, I mean, did you...
That's how repressed.
Yeah, no, I mean, like, I'm just trying to get at this idea, like, were you playing, like, did you... When did you first pick up... Were you playing a wash tub bass? When did you...
Well, actually, no, I was playing mostly guitar. I also played auto harp, a little mandolin, harmonica, but mostly guitar. And then after I went to Cal for a year and a half, and then I was going to drop out for a year because I was really tired of going to school. I wanted to do something else, so I withdrew, actually in good standing, and then I worked for the phone company to make money to go travel. The longest 3 months of my life working for the phone company, I'll tell you. And then during that time, Country Joe and the Fish started, So, and I became a bass player because I was listening to Bach, Joseph Spence, and the Byrds, and they all had interesting bass things going on. So I rented a bass and Country Joe and the Fish got an electric bass. Actually, I rented it first.
Was it a Fender bass or was it an actual electric bass?
It was a bass guitar of a brand that no longer exists, and I remember the little pickups were screws, right? And I would they'd fall out. And so I'd be on stage looking around and screw that thing back in.
Wow.
Keep playing.
Wow. I mean, can you...
And I just want to remark that he doesn't think he ever heard himself singing, for that first year. Just the sound was so terrible, basically, everywhere.
I was going to say, the other cats, I mean, so you basically had natural time feel. It wasn't like you had no academic training at all, and you were just learning to groove on your own.
Yeah. I mean, I had guitar lessons when I was 14 for a while, and that was about it. And I just played, that's what you did, and played regularly a lot, with friends or alone, or, There was one folk music show on in L.A. in like '63, I think, and that was a 2-hour show on an FM station. That's where I first heard Bob Dylan, and I went down to the White Front, which had a record section. I said, "Do you have anything by this guy Bob Dylan, Dillon?" I said, "You got your Matt Dillon from Gunsmoke, you know." And the guy knew. He said, "Oh, it's Dylan, D.Y."
You know, it's
So-
DY. I know, but I mean, you must did so. Could you talk about? I mean, this is so fascinating. Talking to Bruce Barthol here, who cooking the groove with Country Joe from '65 to '68. I just called Country Joe, and he just said he was all about doing an interview, and now he's running away from me now, which is really interesting. But what about your encounters with the Merry Pranksters?
Well, you know, they were gone, I think, actually by '66. I don't think were the Pranksters still running then? They were just a little early. I did go to the Trips Festival.
Can you talk about that? What was that? Muir Beach?
No, the Trips Festival, at least it might have been the second one, was at the Fillmore, and the Dead played, and maybe I forget who else. Anyway, I remember it was like this other world. You know, there wasn't even that much long hair yet, right?
Right.
65 and 6, early 66, 65 for sure. And I walked in, and the sound was like overwhelming, and people, you know, just moving as they wanted to. And then a bunch of guys, there were these huge, giant speakers on stage. A number of guys were lying in them.
Wow.
I bet you they've been deaf for a while now, but yeah, it was really quite a scene. Very liberated, you know.
Were there two buckets of Kool-Aid, one that was so clean and one that was full of liquid acid?
I was unaware of it.
Right.
Whatever that bucket was, I didn't see it, you know.
Right. So, but as far as Kesey is concerned, what would you contribute to his legacy of that time? What is his legacy to that time period? Obviously, you're 100% correct. I mean, Ken Babbs, I've done a few interviews, and by 67, he openly told me they were crawling underneath the concrete to get away from the masses. It was getting too intense, and then eventually they all kind of bolted up to the Oregon area. But
yeah,
how did they fit into the whole equation in your mind, being that you were really pretty locked in by that? You know, you moved up in '64, but you were starting to contribute to the entire vocabulary by '65.
Yeah, or '66, I would say. That's when I joined Country Joe and the Fish, although I was contributing. I was on strike at Cal, and, you know, and we haven't yet talked about the Vietnam War, you know, which gained in prominence through that period, too. But, you know, I didn't know Kesey. I didn't really know the Merry Pranksters. They were all older, right? They were all like at least 10 years older than me, mostly. So they were beatniks, birthing the hippies, I would say. Yeah, that's pretty good. They were beatniks who were birthing the hippies.
Right, and then but the Trips Festival beyond, I mean, in today's culture, it would be like, oh yeah, we're going to go to this place where there's all this LSD or all this ecstasy, and we're going to all get blissed out. And the Trips Festival what was the social component? Because I know there was a Trips Festival in Watts, there was the Muir Beach ones, and so I'm just curious about the social consciousness context, at least what you, aside from the melding of psychedelics and guitars and the kind of feedback and reverb and sort of anguish noise in different world, can you talk about the point of view or what they were trying to really get across at that Trips Festival?
I basically it was liberation. I would say that was it. It wasn't that overtly political, except that it was completely political because they were, whacking at the foundations of the society in some ways. Uh, yeah, I'm not sure if that's answering your question.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, essentially, like you walked out of there. I mean, liberate. I get liberated every day doing talking to you guys and gaining more information for myself. So, what was liberating about it for you?
Well, the idea that there could be a big hall filled with people who were something like me. There you go. That's what it was. Also, it was like, wow, I'm not alone. That was a big thing for a number of years as the movement of the counterculture. There are more and more, various kind of people who were not going along with things. They were, I remember it would have been in '67, I think, driving over from Berkeley to San Francisco on the Bay Bridge, right,
Yep.
to an anti-war den. There's a big anti-war march going on that was going to go on that day. And usually, when you're driving around in those days, you'd regularly people would flip you off or yell at you for having long hair. Even in that area, it wasn't so common. Outside of the Bay Area, man, it was hell. I'll tell you. But and we're driving across the Bay Bridge, and I look around at the other cars, and they're freaking all going to the demonstration. It was astounding. Actually, there's enough of us to fill up the Bay Bridge going to an anti-war demonstration. That was really amazing to me. And then there were something like 100,000 people at that demonstration in San Francisco. Okay. And that was one of the first times that the anti-war marches were not attacked by soldiers and off-duty soldiers. That was a regular feature. The back of the line would get these guys coming up and attacking people.
This is really important. This is, I mean, yeah, this is there, wow. I mean, and there wasn't, I mean, to be clear, there wasn't you felt like you were alone because there weren't so many disseminators of information. You didn't have cable news. You had 3 channels. You had newspapers. You felt like you weren't alone because for a long time, all you would hear is pro-America, patriotism, hate the hippies, hate the long hair, hate the gays. Is that it?
Yeah. Yeah, except that, this is right when there started to be hippies and long hair and stuff, so that it was just so rigid. I mean, like during the free speech movement, there was when it began with surrounding a police car, which was, they didn't bring cop cars on campus. That really wasn't done to arrest a guy who was sitting at a table handing out information. So we stopped being able to take him out of the campus, and there's that sitting around the car lasts for 36 hours, maybe more. But people would speak to the crowd on the top of the car, right? But they'd take their shoes off so they wouldn't damage it. That was that era, right?
I kind of like that.
Yeah, it was, and these very sophisticated debates, going on, philosophy quotes, Thoreau said, blah blah blah, and actually there were people getting up there arguing against it too. It was actually quite vibrant. And
so you had these almost public debates that you would find in the bazaars in Greek and Roman times in some respects.
Yeah.
This is fascinating, and and now you have you have anti-fascists versus fascists now busting canisters over each other's heads now in Berkeley.
Yeah. Well, I do agree. It's hard to let Nazis march. I don't. I think violence is really risky to engage in. On the other hand, I don't think Nazis should march. So I'm kind of, in sympathy with the I mean, I am an anti-fascist, so you know.
No, I'm with you. I
Um,
mean, listen, I just interviewed Charles Neville over the weekend, and he just sent me this poster. It says, he said it's from 1955. He said, no, was on a wall in New Orleans. He said, notice, apostrophe, stop, help save the youth of America. Don't buy Negro records.
yeah.
If you want,
There's a book called Rhythm, Riots, and Revolution. You know, all about how Negro music is ruining white kids.
it says the screaming. If you don't want to serve Negroes in your place of business, then do not have Negro records on your jukebox or listen to Negro records on the radio. The screaming, idiotic words and savage music of these records are undermining the morals of our white youth in America. That was 1955. So,
Yeah. And it was all true. All completely true. They were right.
when you look back on it, and we've been cooking here for 60. We're gonna have to do part 2, only dedicated to your work in the Mime Troupe, which started in '76. But if you could just give some perspective, looking back on it, some people feel. I've talked to a lot of people now. Enough cats that from your generation or a little bit before who wonder, was it a revolution for revolution's sake, or was it actually a prudent thing? How do you come down on that?
Well, you know, the problem with the hippie movement, if we can even call it that, is that, you know, it was real unclear what it was. You know, you could be anything
Right.
and be a hippie, which was like the plus and the minus of it. You know, nobody screened you when you decided to become a hippie, you know, so all kinds of people eventually were hippies, but early on it was such a conscious choice to protest with how you look, you know. I remember when I fled to England in '68, I was standing on the King's Road looking at the Young Tories march, right?
Right.
And a bunch of them had long hair. This so offended me. I started yelling, get a haircut, get a job. You know, just 'cause the idea that young conservatives would have long hair was just, now the Klan has fucking long hair, you know, so I guess we won that one.
Well, this is so what, so tell me, looking back on it, something, I mean, it's a mixed bag, would you say? Have we come so far? I mean,
Yeah.
I guess here's the other thing where the rubber meets the road for me is you know, what is the if have we reached a point, do you feel, where somebody now, with the help of maybe a 20% electoral base who believes in complete fake news, are people now above the law? Is this going to be the proof? Because when my fear, or what I feel is coming, is that I don't know if Mueller will indict Trump, but I think that Mueller might wind up getting some of his family, and I think to myself, okay, so you know, if I guess, let me just ask you this: if the rule of law falls, or is seen as not a factor anymore, where does that leave us?
Well, I don't think it's that bad. For one thing, Trump is less and less popular. He's not more and
I
more
don't believe
popular.
I don't believe the polls, man. I don't believe them. And also, there's against a generic candidate, I'm sure he is. But when you put somebody up there and they start to sling mud at him, all of a sudden it's just a 40-40 cut. I mean, really, there's a lot of people that don't open their mouths that are pretty culturally biased. Anyway, go ahead. I don't want to cut you off.
Yeah, that's true. Well, you know, Trump won the white vote. You know,
Trump won the poor vote, the white vote, the poor white vote, and he won the rich white vote.
Yeah, that was an interesting thing. You know, I once took a poll, some newspaper thing, who are your politics like in some stupid ass magazine, right? So I go through it, and at the end, I look to see where my score puts me, and it put me with black people who hadn't graduated from college,
That's right where
from high school.
that's right where you should be.
That's it. Yeah,
I'm sorry. Yeah,
hey.
that's ridiculous. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
no,
it's
I
like
mean,
the mime troupe
but I want to. But beyond the polls and the unpopularity, why is it not as bad? Because we are living in a hyper-reflexive media time. So why is, in your mind, is it not that bad? Tell me.
well, you know, the Nazis try to march and they can't. Too many people show up.
You mean in
You know,
You mean in San
in
Francisco? In San Francisco, right? Or Boston?
in Berkeley and in Charlottesville and everywhere.
Well, they
They're
marched. I mean, they
outnumbered.
marched. They are outnumbered, but they marched in Charlottesville and they killed somebody.
Yeah, well, you know, the Nazis have always marched somewhere. Famous one in Skokie, right?
I love that movie
Chicago.
so much. Yeah. Oh God, I love that film.
Yeah. And so I think they breed greater resistance, actually. That people actually don't, even white people, don't really like Nazis. You know, mostly. Nazi fans would have to be pretty small percentage of the country. You know, if 20% are stone reactionaries, you know, you'll never be able to do anything with. Only half of those people like Nazis. You know what I'm saying? Nazis is a bad image.
Well, but um,
So I think if they march and they get associated with Trump, you know, that's probably good in a sense.
yeah, but I mean, I guess. Okay, Nixon knew. You know, Ford was going to pardon him, and Nixon was going to, instead of, you know, and then he resigned, and then he left. I think to extract Trump from the White House, there's going to be a lot of bloodshed because his base is angry. And whether they are affiliated neo-Nazis or not, they want a war. I listen to hate radio all day long. I have my daughters listen to hate radio all day long because I want them to know that this is what they are up against. It is the multi-ethnics. I am Jewish. My wife is Taiwanese. So it's the multi-ethnics versus Sharia Christian law. And that's the new war. That's the soul of this country. So just tell. Yeah.
I think it's been going on forever, basically.
I think you're right. I think that I just want to know if somebody proves that they're above the law, how bad is that? I mean, you could see McCain made a statement. He said after Arpaio, it was kind of like saying to Trump, "This was your one get out of jail free card. Don't even try to pardon people if they get charged with crimes by Mueller." And he's going to do it anyway.
I remember, you know, Nixon is instructive because, you know, Nixon won so overwhelmingly in '72. You know, that was, you know, McGovern just got his ass kicked, you know, and so in '72, he was very popular and you know, 2 years later, he was not popular. And 3 years later, he was gone, right?
Right.
Or something like that. And so things do change. Somebody said, who was it? I think Trotsky, in the history of the Russian Revolution. Or maybe it was the Tsar and the Tsarina. He was a real good writer, by the way. Anyway, he said that the Tsar seemed impregnable in 1914. You know, he almost fell in 1905, and those days were over, everybody thought. You know, in 1914, no way you could get rid of the Tsar, and he was gone in 3 years. Things do change, you know. And so...
Have we reached that?
I think Trump's actually very weak. I think he's very weak.
You know,
I've never seen, even with Nixon, I've never seen, I mean... If you check out late night TV, there is not one defender. You know, all those comedy shows, they seemingly all start out with kick Trump in the ass for the first couple of minutes. that's different.
Yeah, I part of it is also, though, in my mind, that I don't know what you were talking before. You said there was more 50%. We have this 1% now. The thing that disturbs me is that at the grassroots, the people that are the biggest Trump supporters don't realize that he doesn't have their best interests in mind at all and has no ways to help them. And so it's hard for me to see a really, unfortunately, in this time that we live with saturation of media, it doesn't seem like there'll be a relenting if you have 15 or 20% of people staunchly supporting somebody who could care less about them, and they believe him hook, line, and sinker. Especially somebody like Trump who's mentally ill, it's going to be hard to extract him. Period. He's not going to go down. He's not going to. I hope you're right. I really hope you're right. But I fear that there's a reckoning coming, and I just don't also see. Part of my show is about leadership, and I don't see impeachment hearings being taken up in the House, even if he breaks the law, or I just see it being watered down. And again, you've seen this a lot longer, and I think that some of the stuff you talked about, how repressive things have been enlightening. But at the same time, we were a grossly rich country at that time, and when Kennedy came into office, anyone that made over $100,000 was paying 90 cents on the dollar for any dollar over that. So now we're just now we're broke, and what I look at and I say, what you're really dealing with, the rage is despair and no hope. And I'm not talking about the people that are dealing with what's going on in Houston. I'm talking about all these swaths of our country in these towns that have been decimated. They feel left behind, and they have no way of getting out of it. And they see a guy like Trump who went bankrupt and rebounded and came back, and they don't realize that he has all these resources, and he's probably been doing illegal shit with criminals in Russia for his whole life. And yet they look at their own situation and they say, I have no hope, and I am raging. And that's the thing I look.
I think you're overgeneralizing. Like, you got to keep in mind that, like, in some West Virginia county,
right,
had gone for Obama and then went for Trump. That's more complicated than just a bunch of assholes, right? I mean,
I dig.
Now I think there is a group that's just a bunch of assholes, and that's basically the people who have a religious. They're religious fanatics. These are the some big portion of the evangelicals. These harsh Christians who forgive a philandering pervert, right? But because in their worldview, which is that there's some figure in the Bible who's necessary to come back before we get to Armageddon and the rapture and that bullshit.
Yeah, you're right.
There's a guy who is a bad guy, but he brings forth this part of the thing to bring the four horsemen, or however it goes. And they think that's Trump. So he's sent by God. That's why they're impervious to any argument, any bit of logic. But they're not all the Trump voters. There may be half of them, right? Those are the people who you just can't reach. The other people are just people who are, I had a hard time voting for Clinton.
Me too.
She was
Me too.
Such a
Me too.
Terrible.
Me too. But I did check I did check the box for her, though.
I did too, just because I knew whatever was going on, having a big popular vote would be better than not. Now I was right, because she did win the election. So now, in a way, one thing I said that really pisses some people off. They say, "Well, one good thing about Trump getting elected is at least we don't have Hillary."
Well, and yeah, I mean,
where wars would we be in with Clinton? She loved wars.
Well, and I look at it and I say sometimes these things can be, like you said, the biggest blessings, you know, in the world, because it actually, it's a latent thing, but people like Trump and sort of his bigoted point of view and his just sort of outlandish off the cuff statements and his blatant flaunting of the law, it actually raises awareness amongst groups that really were sort of ebbing and flowing, just sort of ebbed for a while. So you could see this potentially if it gets crazy enough where people are saying this is absolutely, you know, the over time, if how exhausted people will be in 2.5, 3 years, 4 years, and all of a sudden you have these, you know, a serious congealing of something similar to that moved along in the 60s in Berkeley, as we've been talking about. So listen, Bruce, I had a ball, man. Let's do set 2 pretty soon. Does that sound good? Okay.
Sure. Yes, I enjoyed it.
All right, man. Much love to you. Thank you, brother. I'll get this out to you later.
All right, Jake. Great, man. We'll schedule the next one. Give me a buzz.
All right, my man. Be good.
You too.
Later.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Just another day here on the Jake Feinberg Show. Bruce Barthol from the Mime Troupe and Country Joe and the Fish. Before that, we heard from Steve Kahn, an amazing guitar player. We'll be back this week with a bevy of interviews. Until then, peace.